Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking video podcast discussion. All right, good evening. My name is Corey Lee, co-host of More Than Walking Super Adaptable podcast. With the election around the corner, we feel it's important to share with our viewers, as well as next week's participants, the truth regarding election integrity by hearing the facts from local leaders who are directly involved with the process. In tonight's segment, our questions will be answered by our guest, Jim Simon, the Democratic Registrar of Voters for the town of Stratford, Connecticut. Welcome. Thank you, Jim. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Corey, great to be with you tonight. I've always been interested in politics and government. I was a newspaper reporter for 10 years with the Associated Press, covering politics and presidential elections. Went back to school. I got a PhD in public administration. How does government work? Taught journalism and do political reporting over at Fairfield University for almost 20 years. And then got elected a Registrar of Voters in Stratford, Connecticut. Every town in Connecticut has two registrars of voters, a Republican and a Democrat, kind of keeping an eye on one another. Kind of checks and balances, kind of butting heads sometimes. But hopefully the truth kind of emerges from that.
Nice. That's awesome. And I love that it's a bipartisan effort, right? You know, both on each side of the coin and being able to allow for voters to know that they can trust that, hey, listen, this is checked by both sides. I love that. So we're going to begin with question one. How do we know if we can trust election results? And what is the process by which elections are made secure?
Yeah, it's so much more complicated these days. So there are three ways to vote in Stratford or anywhere in Connecticut. You can go on November 5th. In Stratford, there are 10 different polling locations. One cool thing in Connecticut is you can register to vote on election day. Even if you're not registered, we really want you to vote. So you can go to the basement of Stratford Town Hall. You would register on election day, Tuesday, November 5th, between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. And you vote right there. So you can vote early on November 5th. You can always vote, if you're sick or you're taking care of somebody who's sick, or you're going to be out of town, or if you're in the military or over in Germany, you shouldn't lose your vote. So there's always been absentee ballots in Connecticut. That's another way you can vote. You talk to the town clerk, you apply for it, and there are very strong safeguards kind of built into that system. But what I'm most excited about is this early voting that the voters approved 2 years ago. It's over at the Baldwin Senior Center next to the library in Stratford. The first day, we had 900 voters take part in this. That was more than we expected for the whole week. By the second week, this is statewide, the Secretary of State ran out of envelopes to stick your ballot in. We had to have an emergency printing of the extra ballots because this is so popular. So this is the 9th day of early voting out of 14 days. We're already up to 7,000 voters. We only expect 28,000 to vote in Stratford. A quarter of them have voted already, plus even more in terms of absentee ballots. And to answer your question more specifically, this early voting, which is just so popular, it's a combination of the two kind of voting. You go in person, you show your ID, you kind of get checked off, you're given a ballot, but then kind of like absentee ballots, you fill it out, you put into an envelope, you sign your name to ascertain you really are a citizen and you really did fill out that ballot, and then you drop it in a big white mail drop box. They are secured overnight. A Democrat and a Republican counts the ballots. And then they're opened by a Democrat and a Republican ballot counter on election day. Nothing gets open until 10 o'clock on election day. Then they're fed through the same kind of tabulator that you would see at a polling place. So, I ran for Registrar of Voters 4 years ago, wanting to kind of shake up the system. I must say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm actually impressed by a lot of the things that Connecticut does. We were behind on a lot of things. Everybody else, 42 other states, have early voting, and we're finally catching up. So I am convinced the system is as foolproof as it could be. Again, a Republican and a Democrat are watching everything. And I can talk more about the safeguards if you want me to.
No, that's awesome to know. And I love the fact that you said that you can even vote up until the day of election, right? And so that allows people who may still want to come in person or may, want to still have to go through the verification process. Because if you're doing it right then and there, you can physically see somebody filling out their ballot and you can check their identification, as you said, so that there's no worries about this person is illegally voting.
I mean, we checked their identification, then they fill out the ballot privately, right? There's a privacy booth that they fill it out. Nobody else can see it. They seal it, drop it in the box. And the nice thing is, even this week, we have this early voting every day till this Sunday. Please come to the please come to the Baldwin Senior Center every day from 10 to 6, at least from 10 to 6. And you also can register to vote there. If you don't think you're registered, come. We'll register you. If you're not sure you're registered, come. We'll look you up and we'll register if you're not. And right there, you'll be able to vote. We want to make it as easy as possible, easy and safe and secure and legal as possible.
Awesome. That I love hearing those types of safeguards. All right. So what evidence would exist to show that an election was stolen, and how common is voter fraud, and what effect does it have on election outcomes in the United States?
Well, do you have a couple of hours to talk about that? In the 1980s is when a lot of the paranoia kind of popped up for good reason. I can remember lots of stories about the early voting machines in Ohio, and the election starts at 6 a.m. And they found some of them already had 300 votes recorded for one candidate or another. One candidate had minus 12 votes already recorded before the polls opened. Now, in Stratford, we're much more careful about that. We have a public showing of our election machines that the Republican and Democratic registrar get together. We test the machines with computer cards that we get from a third party. And we show you on election day, if you go to any polling place at 6 a.m. on election day, we run the machine to show it's called a zero tape. There are 0 votes for the governor, for president and senator or whoever kind of is on the ballots. And then even at the end of the day, we run the tape again to show all the votes. And we literally stick this to the wall so it's as visible as possible. I once ran for town council and lost, and yet I only lost by about 40 votes out of 1,200, but I was really convinced that the system was kind of on the up and up. I think the more you get away from November 5th, the more you get away from election day, you need even more safeguards kind of built into the system. There's one famous Republican who says there's this fat kid in New Jersey in his parents' basement filling out hundreds of absentee ballots. Well, at least in Connecticut, that just isn't the case. You have to apply for an absentee ballot with your name on it. We check to see if you're registered to vote. You only get one ballot. It has a barcode on it. You have to return it by 8 o'clock on November 5th. You're checked off so that you can't also vote early. You can't also vote on election day. So there are all kinds of safeguards built into the system. It was a foolproof? No. We registrars like to joke. We like blowout elections. If someone wins by 300 votes, there probably is no, question about who won. It's really tough when it's 1 and 2 and 3 votes difference between candidates. We have an automatic recount in Connecticut. It's open to the public. And I've had a couple of elections overturned on me. My candidate was going to win by 1 or 2 votes, and I wound up losing because voters don't follow instructions. Go back to high school, you have a pen, you just fill in a little circle. That's kind of how you vote. You fill in a little dot, and a lot of people put a big X, and the machine can't read that. Or put an arrow, the machine can't read that. Or write, this is my candidate, the machine can't read that. So we pick, in a close race, we send the ballots through again, and we kind of pick up those things. And it certainly can have a difference. But I would think the biggest problem of election irregularities is often the voter just not following instructions.
Yeah, I was doing some research behind it, and I was reading like a bipartisan think tank from the Brennan Center, and it just said like you said, a lot of misleading information. If a prominent individual says there is a kid in a basement filling out unlawful ballots and what have you, somebody who is stuck on that could be really happening will then say, okay, so many people are doing it. And then once that happens, it kind of takes legs of its own. I read one statistic that said 0.0003% to 0.0025% of incidences have been reported. So, all that really concludes is that you're more likely to be struck by lightning than for another person to impersonate another voter.
Anybody can hold a press conference to say anything they want. But to be specific, after 2020, President Trump filed lawsuits in 69 states, and he lost all 69 cases because you can say anything at a press conference, but in court, your attorneys will be punished if they openly lie in court. You actually have to have evidence in court. The most famous case in 2020 is in Georgia. They counted the ballots once. They counted them 2 times. Biden went up. They counted them a 3rd time, and there was simply no significant difference in the outcome at all. So again, anybody can kind of sow seeds of distrust or whatever, the things that will help them. But trying to prove in court, I'm not aware of any significant outcomes that have ever been overturned in courts.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of that. I read somewhere where there were few election periods that they went through, like general election periods, and they found some 475 cases altogether of possible voter fraud. And to go back to something you said earlier, it's kind of like when voters mistakenly fill out information that's inaccurate and what have you. And those are a bit of those discrepancies, but nothing intentional, like, or in droves of people trying to overturn. And even those small incidences, they're out of millions of people who have cast their vote. So that's the reality of it. Um,
We especially like our Connecticut system. We believe in a paper trail, right? There are states where it's a video poker game. So there's a screen. You simply push Donald Trump or you push Kamala or whatever. And then what happens? Nobody knows. In Connecticut, you're filling out a paper ballot. It gets read by the traditional machine. But most importantly, we can recount the ballots afterwards. We really like that feature of our system. We don't want to change it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So kind of go back to what you were saying a little bit more. So if candidates or voters doubt election results, what legal actions can they take to resolve those doubts?
The parties kind of take the lead on this. They certainly have an incentive to be sure that their candidates are elected. And if they smell anything being wrong, they're the ones usually who kind of file suit. One nice thing in Connecticut is we're required as registrars to announce here's where we're going to test the voting machines. Come watch us in the town council chamber on this date at this time. We announce. It's funny. I think only 5%. Actually, let me back up a little bit. The Secretary of State automatically forces registrars to recount the ballots, to rerun the ballots in 5% of the polling places. So Stratford shouldn't be picked too often, but it's been picked for 5 years in a row. So that's a public thing. We advertise when it's going to be. Candidates who are affected show up just to see if the results are any different. We try to do things as transparently as possible. My Republican counterpart and I are fierce partisans. I'm a Democrat. He's a Republican. But we put that aside when it comes to election integrity, because if people doubt the system, it kind of hurts both parties, I would argue. And he totally agrees on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with it as well, because at the end of the day, regardless of if your candidate wins or not, you still are subject to the same policies unless you move out of the country or something. So whether that has to do with Social Security, veterans benefits, tax codes, under a Republican president, you'll see change whether you want to deal with it or not. And being able to come into terms that, listen, this is where I stand on the policy, has nothing to do with, I'm just going to align myself with the party simply because I just want to remain on party lines, but to be the neutral referee in the situation is important, and it reassures voters all across the country.
Hey, Super Adaptables! We're in another election cycle in the US, and with so many issues at stake on the ballot, a person can easily lose sight of what they're voting for.
That's why there's ballotpedia.org. It's like an encyclopedia for American politics. You can look up trustworthy, unbiased information on past and present elections, from your local municipalities up to the presidency, to find out where candidates stand in terms of their policy position.
So, if you want to know what's going on in today's political world, check out ballotpedia.org and stay informed.
So the next question is kind of breaking down like the Electoral College in a way that is comprehensive because it is widely misunderstood. I would say, because people say get rid of it, use the popular vote, etc. But how are U.S. elections verified?
In terms of the Electoral College,
Yes.
so, each state has, let's go back a very short history lesson. The founding fathers, and they all were fathers, a whole bunch of guys, didn't trust the voters. They didn't want to have a national popular vote for fear of the people might do the wrong thing. So in Connecticut, we elect a president, but you're actually voting for, if Donald Trump's going to win the state, he has a list of people pledged to him that he's confident will support him. You're actually voting for those people to then go to Washington and support Trump. And Kamala has her list as well. You're actually voting for, not for Kamala, but for that list of electors to go to Washington and vote for Kamala. So it's kind of built into the system. It's, I think, an unnecessary step. I would strongly prefer to do away with it. You can, instead of having electors, certainly winner take all in each state. And each state is given a certain number of electoral votes depending on its size, blah, blah, blah. That gets boring. Many people would just like a national kind of referendum. Whoever gets the most votes across the country wins. The problem with that, if you're a Republican, California is so freaking big, I think 15% of the whole country, that there's just so many people there, it would kind of outweigh, 10 other Western states. So you would have to get 35 states to approve a constitutional amendment. That's not going to happen. But there are other ways. I think we can simplify the process, do away with these electors, and just automatically, if Trump wins Connecticut, he automatically gets the 8 electoral votes or kind of whatever it is. So, just simplifying our system, I think would be a big step forward.
Awesome. And could you kind of briefly explain, like states like Nebraska and Maine, where they have like the district type of voting? Like, could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, they're the oddballs. They're kind of the exceptions to the rules. Usually, if it's more likely Kamala is going to take Connecticut, she'll win all of our electoral votes, 8 or whatever. Both in Maine and Nebraska, the state is kind of divided in half. They have 2 electoral votes, but like northern Nebraska gets one and southern Nebraska gets another. Same thing in Maine. It's just kind of a quirk. They're tiny little states in terms of population, but it's such a tight election. Some people are predicting 269 electoral votes to 269 electoral votes that those tiny states might actually have quite an impact this year.
Yeah, definitely. I was reading something about how, like, sometimes those things can like tip the scales, where it was like a AI kind of prediction where it's like if I think it was either like I think it was Nebraska, if one of them had won it, then it would be tied all, right there at 269, and then it would then go to the House of Representatives, and then they have to cast their ballot. So, in reassuring voters, right, the emphasis has been placed so much on the fraudulent activities, right? Sometimes, we've heard stories of, well, the ballot boxes were underneath the table, they were hiding them. Here, in recent times, there's been destruction of postal boxes and what have you. There's a lot of like violence or violent activity related to it. So, just going back a little bit, what is the process of assuring that their fraudulent ballots are just not counted at all?
Sure. Let's do a couple of the safeguards built in the system. So in Stratford, if you have an absentee ballot, you have to get it back by election day at 8 o'clock. And to make it as easy as possible, we have this white ballot drop box on the side of Town Hall along Main Street across from the fire station. And those are the boxes that have been attacked elsewhere. In Stratford, we have not one, but we have 2 cameras 24/7 on those boxes. The boxes are emptied twice a day to be sure there are no ballots in there for someone to throw paint or do something really kind of stupid. We would just kind of throw the book at them. The police are very aware of this. We've had lots of discussions in terms of safeguarding our box. And thankfully, I think there's a lot of civic pride in Stratford, and that just hasn't been a problem. But let me give you an example of how this early voting works, because I think it shows the lengths that we go to. I'll try to do this in 90 seconds. So you cast your ballots, you put it into an envelope, you seal it, you sign your name to show that you really did it. You drop it in this white ballot drop box. At the end of the night, we open up this lock box at the Baldwin Center, and a Democrat and a Republican count the number of envelopes. We're not opening the ballots, counting the number of envelopes. They agree on the number of envelopes. We put it into a secure container. We lock it. We have a numbered seal that's put around it. There's an affidavit filled out by the Democrat and Republican and the 2 registrars. Here's what we found on this day. That box is taken to a secure location and not touched until election day. So we're going to have 14 days of early voting. We're going to have 14 of these boxes to open at 10 o'clock on November 5th. Again, there'll be Democrat and Republican pairs of ballot openers. There'll be a Republican and a Democrat next to each other. One person slices it open, puts the name to the side so nobody can see it, puts the ballot over here in a stack, and goes through that for thousands of ballots. We've had 7,000 early voters already in Stratford, again, in like 9 days. And then later in the day, as close to 8 o'clock as possible, they're fed into a tabulator machine, which kind of automatically counts them. So you can see the safeguards built in again. Both parties are involved. There's a numbered seal that's put on it tonight, because I brought it to the secure location, 2 of us. The seal is, we double check on election day, the seal's not been opened. It's the right number. We kind of double check all of that. And we've had a lot less problems in Stratford than our sister city, perhaps in Bridgeport, has had. Read any of the headlines.
Wow. So in the event that something was, open, damaged somewhere along the lines, is that ballot then thrown out? How does that work?
The nice thing in that white ballot drop box is that you've signed the outside of it and there's a barcode. So if some ballots were harmed, we would be able to figure out who cast them. And then what they've done in similar situations elsewhere, you immediately contact the person and say, would you like to recast your ballot?
I see.
If this is extremely unlikely, it has never happened, but if a large number of ballots were involved, a judge can intervene and open the polling hours later or make some other kind of the courts try not to intervene in the election process.
I see. So how do the integrity safeguards compare down ballot and top of the ticket election results?
Yeah, so this year's ballot has, president, senator, Congress, state senator, state representative, and registrar of voters on the ballot. So the protections certainly extend from the presidential level all the way down to my really low level. It's kind of the ballot as a whole that's kind of protected, I think, rather than protecting any more at the top or at the bottom of the ballot.
I see. So
Great.
there's
Giving your audience, let me just tell you a quick incident that happened today. One of the proudest things is in Connecticut, in Stratford, there are 10 polling places plus the basement of town hall. So we have 11 of these IVS machines to help people with disabilities vote. If you are blind, if you are deaf, if you are quadriplegic, we have a machine that has endless adaptations to kind of help you vote. And for the first time in my 4 years, I saw a blind woman come in. She asked for a little bit of help. She had a touch pad that she knew how to manipulate. She had headphones put on. It's arranged kind of with Hartford. They know the list of candidates in Stratford. Candidates for president kind of read to her. She pushed whatever button she wanted to. It literally prints out a conventional ballot with her name on it. We quickly close it up so we don't see it, and we kind of put it into an envelope. And it just thrilled me that she was able to vote. I was also thrilled. We haven't done that much in the last 3 years with people in rehab hospitals or nursing homes. They shouldn't lose their ability to vote. They're Americans. So I'm very, very proud that my Republican colleague and I went to Lord Chamberlain Rehab Hospital. We helped 40 people vote. We do called supervised elections. We bring the ballots there, check them off, and have them votes and seal their ballots. And again, they'll be counted on election day. Went over to Spring Village or Atria, I guess it used to be called, and did the same thing with 19 others. So I'm just thrilled that 60 people who needed some help were able to get it because they're Americans and they have the right to vote as well. It's one of my proudest accomplishments in 4 years.
wow, no, and that's awesome to know. Like, and I think that, when it comes down to voting, when we talk about this idea of voter fraud happening, I think we miss out on the fact of how many Americans just simply want to do it the right way. And even those who have disabilities or may not be able to get to those polling stations, that you guys have a system that thinks about people like myself, where they can go to a neutral place, both Republican and Democrat, and say, hey, listen, this is what is needed, or you're using a special type of technology that enables you to be able to cast your vote. That is highly important because it gives us a sense of belonging as a part of this entire democratic process. Because oftentimes we already feel like we're on the outskirts due to our disability and due to the way that we're perceived, but it shows a genuineness that I don't think has ever been talked about in the media. I think it's been so concentrated that there are a group of people that are going to illegally vote, and then the irony is that the illegal votes cast never are brought up when they are winning on the local levels. It's always just a general election. So there's a bit of hypocrisy there. But even speaking to that, and not to sound redundant with some of the questions, but it's almost like, to what extent can results be trusted, even if voter fraud is present? And I would say, how do we reverse what is put into our minds from one election to the next?
Well, it's easier to be cynical than to be hopeful or optimistic. There's a dark side in everyone's psyche that wants to distrust things and assume things are the worst. And boy, what we know from social media is they kind of prey on that everybody has a different feed on Facebook, and they have figured out what will get you excited and mad and emotional, not informed and intelligent and supportive. Because the madder you get, the more you kind of go down the rabbit hole, as it's called. So boy, I'm a former journalist. I think social media, Facebook, TikTok are kind of ruining things. Part of me wants to have free speech for everybody, but part of me sure doesn't want everybody just being fed a steady diet of problem, 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 when 94% of the country is in really good shape. I'm making up those numbers, obviously. But I really think the social media that we choose to pay attention to is having just a terrible effect on society.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think also that most people, when they're consuming that type of information, they only get it from one source and they don't want to hear it elsewhere. So they don't have the access or maybe even just the desire to just go to maybe their local town hall and talk to, individuals such as yourself that can give them the unfiltered truth and say, hey, listen, no, this is what we're doing. Don't get so consumed in the algorithm that keeps feeding your appetite for destruction. The truth is, this is the way that we've done business. And even up until this point, it's like, how often have we found people questioning the integrity of any election? You know what I mean? Like the first time I was ever able to vote was Bush's second term. So I graduated high school in 2001. I went off into the Navy. And so I had to do absentee ballots, right? And they weren't like, hey, do it like this, go this way, only vote, this way. They handed us our ballots, we filled it out, and we cast our ballot, and it was uh, done with. But the only time I can remember hearing any question about votes was, I think, during the time where President Bush's brother was the governor of Florida, and there was like votes or something like that that turned up missing, and people were concerned. I think a recount happened after that, and the rest is history. Bush wound up winning, but that's the only time I've ever really heard that debate. In the '90s when I was younger, I didn't hear anything about what Clinton. Obviously, too young to get too involved in the civic stuff, but even during current events when George H.W. Bush was in office, there was really no question about it. So, from the local perspective, what qualities and candidates and election officials contribute to public trust in the election process?
I think that's a really good question. I can go in a lot of different ways. Let me go slowly. Everywhere in the country, except Stratford, they're having trouble even finding people to work at the polls because people, I think, are cynical and kind of doubting. In Stratford, we hire 120 people for paid jobs, and I have a waiting list of 40. People enjoy, only get paid roughly minimum wage because it's such a long day. But people there's a civic ethic or ethos kind of in Stratford that I really like. People are concerned about kind of keeping the town strong and kind of trying to improve it. The two parties, try to find people who have some background, so have joined civic groups, have kind of proven themselves a little bit. And I must say, the outcome of town council elections are based largely on the quality of the candidates and getting, they're well known for some other reason, usually ahead of time, and then they want to give something back. When I ran for town council in 2019, I was asked repeatedly, well, how much money are you going to get paid? The answer is zero. Almost none of the jobs at town hall, the elected jobs, get paid. The people on the board of education work endlessly in endless committees. They get zero. They do it out of the love of doing it and trying to give back. So I think both parties really try to get civic-oriented people who are well known. If you have a reputation for something, that helps. Because sometimes you walk into the voting booth, who are these people? I never heard of them. So, that's why candidates put out those little lawn signs. They put little signs on the lawn, vote for Simon or whatever, just to get name recognition, to try to get people to kind of know them. But I think in Stratford, it's a funny town in that the Democrats almost always, I think, always win at the presidential, U.S. Senate, governor, and largely at the legislative level, where Republicans win the town council and board of education seats. In some ways, it's healthy. Neither party can say it's rigged because they're winning. Um, in some ways, I think that's a positive. If it were a one party town up and down the ballot, there'd probably be even more cynicism about it.
You know,
And then finally, I think both the two registrars both have followings within their party. I think most Democrats think I'm looking out for their best interests. Most Republicans think Ludacilia, the Republican registrar, is looking out for their best interest. There's kind of a bit of a balancing act there.
Yeah, I think there's some irony to that statement because no candidate questions where the map kind of lies at when it comes down to the general election. So what's a blue state, and you always will use the term traditionally it's a blue state. So therefore you don't campaign as much there, and you don't stop as hard, but you never say it's rigged, right? So it's going to go in your favor because of the different cities that are, usually densely populated cities are lean more Democratic than Republican as far as rural areas, but it's okay. And I was reading some statistic, but it was like almost, I think it was like down to zero. A particular candidate just did not go to that state at all. But you always hear about, the Georgia, Arizona, Michigan swing states, Virginia, North Carolina. You know what I mean? There's always that targeted audience, but because other states are just given, it's never rigged or fraudulent because you expect it. All right. So going back to that bipartisanship, What are the pitfalls of operating an election in a purely partisan manner?
Sure, I guess the hotter it gets, the more kind of distrust there is. Um, I'm aware of at least 150 Harris wall signs have been stolen from lawns of Democrats in Stratford. And I'm
Mm,
sure there are some Trump signs. There are just fewer Trump signs in Stratford. Yeah. Stolen off the Republican lawns as well. So when it gets feisty and when it gets hot and when it gets really combative, people do stupid things like go to someone's private property and take their lawn sign away. It's just bad in my mind. I always tell my Democrats, work harder if you don't like what's going on. Let's reverse things kind of at the ballot box. Um, I think there certainly are restrictive laws in other states. You always read about state Supreme Courts in another state knocking people off the ballot or whatever. There just is less of that in Connecticut. You have this stereotype of being kind of genteel and civilized here. No, it really isn't true, but maybe more so than other states, I guess. It's very combative in Stratford. There are hard feelings at the end of elections, um, but so far so good. Knocking on wood, as I said here, we've been able to avoid some of the problems elsewhere.
awesome. And lastly, what responsibility do candidates have in supporting and maintaining free and fair elections?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. It does ultimately kind of go to them. So, if you are on the campaign trail, you're constantly criticizing the election process as president or whatever you're running for. You're kind of, you're eating away at the integrity of the process, and we just don't have that in Stratford so far. People don't talk about rigged elections unless I'm forgetting something. At least in the 4 or 8 years I kind of have been involved. So far so good, and I really think it's because both parties win on different levels, and I think that kind of helps reinforce things. But again, I'm saddened when lawn signs are spray painted and kind of stolen. In some ways, it's juvenile delinquency rather than a serious crime. But still, we should have fair and honest elections, and people have the right to put up lawn signs. I'm sure there are some Republicans who are afraid to put up Trump signs because, in fact, I've been told there are some Republicans who are afraid to put up Trump signs because their neighbors won't like him anymore. And I know at Spring Road, there are people who say I can't put up a Kamala sign because people will hate me. And that's sad. And you should be able to put up a sign, be able to vote for anyone you want. When the election's over, let's kind of come back together and get on with our lives. It may shock your younger audience members. The parties are dying to sign up some teenagers and people kind of in their 20s. Most of the people who do this kind of stuff, they're old like me. I'm 71. Most people are probably in their 60s and 70s and 80s who are into politics. We will have kind of a younger wave. Just very briefly, one of the other things I'm proud of is that we really go after high school students and try to turn them on to politics in Stratford. My colleague meet every high school student 4 times. We give 32 workshops and one in every single junior year civics class. Civics is required junior year. We went for 45 minutes. We explain, how do you run for office? How would you run for senior class presidents? What would you do to kind of get elected? We then, with a grant from the Rotary Club, we run their senior elections. We bring out our professional voting equipment. We train them to be poll workers, and they actually elect their senior class president and learn how to do it. Then from those student poll workers, we hire them on election day to work in paid jobs for us. And of the 120 people we're paying to work November 5th, 25 of them are high school students. They're, $265 is a lot of money if you're in high school. I have a long list of people who kind of want to do this stuff. And then finally, as we're getting ready for graduation, there's the day where they get their caps and gowns. They have to sit around doing nothing. And my colleague and I go there and we register them to vote. We register often 180 to 200 high school graduating seniors and get them right into the system. So we hit them 4 times. I don't know how much more I can do without turning them off, but we've had some great success. Our biggest problem is the students who like to work elections, want to do the next election and the next election and the next election, and I need room for the new ones to come along. So I have to kind of kick them off as they go to college and kind of move away from Stratford. So, grab them early, try to get them involved and get young people into it.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's very important. Well, thank you, Jim, for taking the time to clarify and provide context behind these important questions. During next week's podcast discussion, our attendees will have the opportunity to listen and provide feedback on election integrity and answer questions about how it possibly impacted them as they went to cast their votes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, sir.
Let's do it again sometime.
Yes, definitely. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right.